Okay, so welcome everybody to Living Your Kick-Ass Life, where I interview people about what the steps they have taken to do just that, live their kick-ass life. And I'm Dr. Bonnie Nussbaum, America's Kick-Ass Coach and Psychologist. I work with people who are wanting to blow their lives up into much more expansive, exciting, interesting existence than what they're currently living. So today I'm going to be interviewing Pat Deere, who is a relationship marketing specialist with Send Out Cards, and she's going to be telling us about her adventure walking the Appalachian Trail. So Pat, welcome. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited.
Good. Well, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about what led up to deciding to make this major step in your life.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, first of all, something like this has always, I suppose, been in the back of my mind, but the exact turn of events was probably I had a brother who passed away, and he was actually, I've had four of my younger brothers passed away. He was my baby brother, and he was kind of my travel buddy. Just, we did a lot of things together. We went to Europe together. We learned to whitewater kayak and rafted and hiked and that sort of thing. And we had actually hiked a small portion of the trail quite a few years ago. And I always thought that that was something that we would do together. So when he did pass away, there was actually that book by Bill Bryson, A Walk in the Woods, in his house. And I looked at that and I thought, I really need to do something to make sure I don't fall into a depression, which I can easily do when I have somebody close to me when that happens. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to walk 500 miles on the Appalachian Trail. And then I had to figure out, how am I going to do this?
Wow. What a big undertaking.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like that a ton of loss in your life very early. I mean, wow, four brothers?
Yeah, there was. My youngest one was only 23. I had a brother 40, a brother, Jeffrey, was only 46. So there was a lot of loss. And we had a family that actually was long living, grandparents that lived in their hundreds and 80s and 90s. And so I feel a little cheated, but you know what? That's life, and a lot of us go through it. But at that time, it was a real struggle.
I imagine.
Yeah.
So what a impactful, powerful decision to make, that you were going to do something to counter what could have, really sent you spinning.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how you went about making this happen.
Okay. Well, first thing was my brother was in Texas. I was in Michigan. So we had to be down there to handle his estate and his trust and that sort of thing. So right away, I just decided I'm going to start walking today. So I would just start walking around his house. And I did that every single day for quite a while. And when I came home, I did the same thing and started researching what I need to do. I actually put feelers out there too, to people that he worked with, people that were friends of his. If they wanted to hike with me, I thought that would have been a really nice healing thing to do.
Very cool.
And a lot of people responded. They didn't necessarily go, but all that part was healing, So hiking. And then when I got home, I live out in the country, and I started, I had bought a backpack originally when I went with Jeffrey that I had never really used. So I just started throwing weight in that and carrying it with me and seeing how far I could walk. And I don't know how much you want me to go into, but that was the beginning. From there was a whole lot of other stuff, creating a spreadsheet to figure out how much food I needed and how many calories I needed to be taking in, and who's going to go with me and how they're going to get there.
How far you could traverse in a day. And
yeah. And with who, everybody that I was going with had various levels of expertise, various levels of want. This was my goal. It wasn't necessarily their goal. A lot of people went just to accompany me and to be my friend, which was really nice.
That's very cool. Yeah.
But that also meant that they weren't necessarily prepared. You know what I'm saying? So that brought in a whole nother level of challenges, I guess you could say.
How did you deal with those challenges? Because I think oftentimes that's something that happens in our life. We bump up against something that makes what we're aiming for a little more difficult, and maneuvering our way through those challenges, barriers, however you want to look at them, difficulties, can be daunting.
They can. That was probably one of the most interesting parts of this for me, is that whole social stuff. And I knew going in that there was going to be probably some of that. There was a lot more of it than I expected.
Okay.
So, for example, I paid off my credit card before I left, thinking, well, I'm not going to spend much money because I've already got all my food packed. I had everything pre-ordered and ready to go. But if there was a challenge, then I would be prepared, right? Well, by the time I got to my one son, it's kind of funny. He lost the keys to the car. So we're up in the mountains and we're making arrangements for a tow truck that we had to pay for. We made, I think the key fob was like $300.
Oh,
We had to spend another extra night in the hotel, extra food. By the time my second son came, we're renting a car. I went to pay for my car and I didn't have enough money on my credit card. And I'm like, no, that can't be true. I paid my credit card off. Well, sure enough, I had racked up a whole lot of extra bills than I expected. So how did I handle that? Pretty well.
good for you.
Honestly, because I kind of expected it, but it was a challenge, and I found it interesting. I guess I found it interesting instead of getting upset or mad.
Which is wonderful. It sounds like you had some distance from it. You could look at it through the curious observer eyes. Isn't this interesting? This is happening, instead of it's right in your face. And
but I did have to add an additional I think it was two weeks on to my trip in the fall, because there was no way I was going to finish my 500-mile goal given the challenges that I faced that first 6 weeks.
And so adding on the 2 weeks, what were some of the gifts that came with those 2 weeks?
Oh, it was wonderful, to be perfectly honest. What I noticed was I really enjoyed walking with people, and I really enjoyed my alone time. So I made arrangements where I met somebody who was going to hike the last week with me, and I knew he hiked fairly fast and how many miles we were going to finish. So I started looking at the trail, and I thought, well, this may be my last hike on the trail. What do I want to see? So I went to Harper's Ferry, and I spent a couple of days there and just hiked by myself north one day and south the next day. And I could pick and choose where I wanted to go. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I had that time by myself where I could just sit and enjoy those things without having to worry about what anybody else wanted to do. And I'm really, really glad that I took the time to do that. So that was definitely one of the blessings.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Did you have a sense, I'm saying this because recently my administrative assistant, her best friend lost her 11-year-old daughter to influenza. And they have plans now to go and do some of the things that this child wanted to do and never is going to have the opportunity to do. Did you feel that in walking the trail that it gave you the opportunity to do what you had intended to do with your brother?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And often I felt like he was walking with me, and I incorporated into not just him, but my family. So for example, the first week was extremely hard because I was new to the trail. I had never hiked anything at that level before. Having weight on my back for a week got wearing over time, and we had a lot of rain. And it was really trying. And the person I was walking with was slower than me. And I knew we'd have a lot of that. Some people faster, some people slower. She happened to be slower, so I was doing a lot of waiting. But we got to a point and I just felt tired. And I just can't even move on. And I love the wind. I have a wind chime actually right outside my window. And I bought that when my youngest brother passed away. And I love listening to that. So the wind reminds me of my family. And I just imagined, and prayed actually. And I said, okay, you guys, you got to help me up this hill. You got to help me up this hill. And every time I'd feel any bit of wind, I just felt my family with me, helping me get it. Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah.
Oh, that is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so, because oftentimes I'll hear that from people who've lost a loved one. I see a hawk and I know that it's my loved one, or I hear a chickadee and I know that it's my loved one. So for you, it's the wind.
Yeah, well, those reminders were wonderful because you felt a lot of that, and there was certain places really up high in the mountains, and I had never experienced this before, and I would just lay back on the rocks, and you could hear the wind coming strong from one direction and then strong from another direction. It's almost like it crashed like a freight train, and it would make this big noise, and then it would just dissipate and go away, and it was just a phenomenal thing. That's probably one thing that I really, really miss, is those kinds of experiences.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome. So do you think you would ever choose to do that again, or portions thereof?
I think portions,
Okay.
like for example, the last section that I talked about where I did things on my time, how I really wanted to do them. The first time I did it the way I did it because I promised my husband I wouldn't walk alone.
Okay.
So that added on all those extra arrangements that I had to make. Once I hiked and I realized that it's not the dangerous thing that people really think it is. I mean, not that there's not dangers out there. It's rough terrain. Things can happen, no doubt about it. There's bears, there's snakes. I mean, there's definitely those things, and there's people. But the people were. It's a camaraderie. People look out for each other. It wasn't a fearful thing to me at all. So what is I can't remember what your question was. Did I answer that question? I might have been kind of getting off track.
Yes.
So, okay.
Awesome. So if you were going to tell someone else what they stand to gain by taking on an adventure like that, what would you say?
For me, you kind of asked me that, and it was kind of an easy thing. I came home with a whole different sense of reality. Before I left, well, first of all, my brother's passed. I was handling his estate, which is another whole different thing, trying to figure it out in my life and trying to grieve and all that stuff at the same time. So every little thing in my life was dramatic, was difficult. It was overwhelming. It was all of that. When I got home, all of those things were still there, but it didn't bother me. Somebody might say something that before I left would just like throw me over the top. When I got home, it's just like, oh my gosh, that's just so-and-so. That's just how this person acts, or that's just the situation. It gave me a sense of perception. I don't know if that's the right word, but peace, serenity. And I still feel it today. I still feel it. I walked my last part of the trail last September, and I mean, I have days that aren't great, but nothing that overwhelms me like it did before I left. So absolutely a whole different sense of peace and serenity in my life.
It sounds like it greatly expanded your perspective so that those things that would have bothered you really kind of have diminished in terms of their impact.
Absolutely. I realized how easy it was for me to blow things out of proportion, or how to preconceive maybe what I thought somebody was meaning in a comment or that sort of thing. It was really easy for me to do that. Okay. Judging people. Oh my gosh. That was a huge one. Is I just don't feel nearly as judgmental, and there's a whole lot of
Talk about that a little bit. What do you think shifted that allowed you to feel differently about people?
Well, for one, you're walking on the trail and you get these relationships with people that are different than anything else you've ever had. So, for example, I personally hate the shelters on the trail. There's shelters that are three-sided buildings, like three-sided cabins, I guess you could say. And I would take my own tent, and most of the time I would sleep in my tent. I just like my personal space at night. I just really, really appreciated that. But there were a few times that the weather was so bad, and everything we had was soaking wet, and it was downpouring. So the right thing to do was to sleep in a shelter. A couple of experiences went well. Do you want me to share a couple of those with you?
Yes.
Okay. So it's pretty hilarious, actually. I did it 3 times. The first time we were soaking wet. I was with my son and daughter-in-law, and we walked into the shelter. There was 2 men sitting there in the shelter already set up, and very simply so. They had their backpack and just a few belongings, and the rest of the shelter was clean and neat. Everything we had was soaked. And so we were trying to decide, do we stay, do we not stay? So, and the guys never said anything to us. So finally I looked at him, I said, okay, you guys are stuck with us for the night. We're coming in. We started unpacking our backpack and putting up clotheslines so we could hang our clothes to dry. I mean, and we took over that. That shelter was hilarious. And I won't tell you one of the stories they told us, but once they realized we were there to stay, and they looked at us and they started telling us hilarious jokes all night long. They kept telling us the same thing. And in the morning, they looked at us and they said, you know what, you guys weren't so bad. We were wondering if we wanted you to hang out with us all night. But we're glad you did, But there's a whole lot of that. you're in a tight situation, sleeping tent to tent or sleeping bag to sleeping bag with people you don't know. You don't have a clue. The next night, I'm with my son and daughter-in-law, and some people were already in there. You could tell for a couple of days. They were packed in like we were. We opened up the tents. They had tents in the front of the shelter to keep the air in the rain out. Mm-hmm. And this big cloud of marijuana smoke comes pouring out, which is pretty common on the trail. A lot of people smoke, you know. One guy decided it was important enough that he carried a large bong with him. So you're carrying all your weight on your back, but it was important for him to carry that bong. That wasn't essential for him, right?
There you go.
So it was a whole different experience than the night before. And then the last time I had to spend the night in the shelter, there must have been 14 people. And I mean, wow. We were tent to tent. You couldn't roll over without feeling the guy or the girl next to you tent rolling over, you know what I mean?
Wow.
For me, very, very awkward. So you got a whole different idea of personalities and people, and it was just
people's level of comfort too.
Yes,
because some of them were probably pretty okay with that and comfortable, and others were less so.
Oh yeah. So that last night when there's 14 people, pouring down rain, and this one girl walked in. She was a through hiker, so her goal was to walk the whole 2,200 miles.
Wow.
And she needed to change her clothes. And there's men and women in there, people you know, people you don't know. And so she just announces, okay, guys, I got to change my clothes. Turn around. And after a little while, nobody did it. She's like, okay, I'm giving you one more chance. I'm going to change my clothes, turn around. And nobody did. So she's like, okay, just starts, changing her clothes in the middle of this group of people. And that's just kind of normal. People become very comfortable with strangers on the trail, So it's interesting. And and actually that last one, there were so many people there, and most of them were through hikers. So they had hiked probably 600, 700 miles by the time they had caught up to us, or we caught up to them. And it was pouring down rain. There was a river next to us that had turned into rapids. I mean, it was just a very rapidy river, and I had to cross that in the morning to get to the trail that we were going to. And of course, all the through hikers are talking, and they almost had me scared to the point that I wasn't going to take that hike. And that was really interesting to me, because I almost allowed their fears to become my fears. In the morning, I woke up and I kayak, and I love the water. I've always loved the water. I'm not a super great swimmer, but I'm comfortable in it, not afraid of rapids. And so I said, Patty, this is stupid, And I walked down to the river and I looked at the water, and I saw where the rocks were and where the easiest place to cross would be. And the guy next to me gave me some advice, and we took it, and it was a wonderful, wonderful walk. It was not really that scary. I just did what I was supposed to do. And because it had rained so much, that was my most beautiful day of hiking. Waterfalls everywhere,
Wow.
And to think that I almost allowed them to change my plans.
Yeah, you would have missed all of that.
Yeah, so that was something that I learned about myself, that I can easily allow somebody else to change that in me.
Wow. So talk a little bit about, what has life been like since coming back? You mentioned that you're far less thrown by things now. What else have you noticed?
Well, from a business standpoint, even, I more easily take on challenges. I don't so easily get overwhelmed by the little details of what has to be done. I can live with a whole lot less than I have. For 6 weeks, the first 6 weeks, pretty much what I did was survived on whatever I had on my back. I would stop on the weekends and we would get clothes, and depending on who I was walking with, we might stay at a hotel for a night or two. But the amount of stuff that I have is really unimportant. What social media does to my psyche, it really can get me down. It was so nice to get away from everything, to not hear about all of the chaos going on at home. In fact, the last week I was hiking with a guy that was very connected, when he could be, and we stayed at one campground that happened to have a TV, and that's when the shooting happened in Las Vegas. And he told me about it, and I went through some difficulty feeling guilty that I didn't want to know about it, but at the same time thinking there is nothing I can do about it while I'm hiking the trail. There's nothing I can do about it when I get home. I really don't want to know the details until I get home, because I need a sense of peace and serenity while I'm here to work through things. So when I get home, I can deal with that stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So there was a whole lot of that kind of stuff. I just feel like I have a better sense of confidence in myself, what I'm capable of doing, for sure. I
I
remember
remember
talking.
that. I remember that as a story that someone told. She did something she had never done before, and she used that moving forward, saying, well, a woman who could do X can certainly do Y. And she
Hmm.
used that as impetus to keep herself challenged to do difficult things.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely not as fearful, not less fear driven for sure. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
I hear your puppy in the background.
That's my son's.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's your son.
He has a puppy. He brings him in. I think he brought him in and went back outside. So yeah, he's kind of whining.
Yeah, not happy.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
So if you were going to share a takeaway, something you'd like the people listening to grab onto and run with, what would be your kind of final words of wisdom?
Yeah. You know what? Before I do that, if you don't mind, I wrote down some notes and I wanted to talk about
Absolutely.
this one. And then I definitely want to go back to that. But
Yep.
you were talking about at one point, what were some of the struggles, I
Yes.
guess, before I left, and this is really important to me. That's why I want to bring it up. Family resistance. Family resistance was really difficult. My husband was never said you cannot go, but he didn't do anything to make it easy for me to make that decision. And I think a lot of it was fear based. He feared the Appalachians, because of these movies you watch, and what people do in the Appalachian, I think he was fearful of bears and snakes and all those things, and my ability to protect myself, and the fact that I said, I understand that's how you feel, but I'm going anyway. That was a huge, huge step for me, um, and other family members too, like, why are you doing this? They just didn't understand. So to be able to say, I'm doing this anyway, that was a really big deal.
Definitely.
Probably the takeaways, I actually wrote it down. Oh yeah, absolutely. Taking time to find what you need to bring a peaceful life regardless of your circumstances. I had one family member say to me, I didn't have to walk 500 miles on the Appalachian Trail to find peace and serenity. I can walk from my car to the house. Well, I'm really glad that person was in that space. I was nowhere near that. I had to do something to get beyond that. Today, I can probably say I can walk from my car into my house and feel peaceful. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And that was a function of having done what you did.
Exactly.
Kind of an irony
Exactly.
there. Yes.
Mm-hmm. It really is interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my perception of people since I've gotten home is just so interesting. When I run into different people and I see situations that I may have judged in the past, I don't really judge it anymore. I just find it interesting. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
I really enjoy observing people.
Yes, because probably from that expanded place where you've now arrived, you can see it through different eyes. You can see much more of what it truly is than what it seemed like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wish everybody have the opportunity to do. I know not everybody's going to walk the Appalachian Trail. Not everybody's going to want to do what I did, but there is something I believe that everybody can do to reach that point, whatever it is for you.
Well, when we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago when I had a women's retreat here, and one of the things that we came up with was, wouldn't it be cool to do like vision quests for women who maybe aren't able or willing to do, I have to test my physical ability, blah, 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 but they still want something that pushes them to that edge of discomfort. So we were thinking we could do things even in my location out behind in the woods. Maybe they just camp out for a night. Maybe they, it's small, but it pushes them out of their comfort zone and helps them realize they can do more than they think they can.
Absolutely. I think that's important.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
So talk a little bit more about how it impacts your work at this point. Because I think a lot of times when people think about doing things like you did, they would view that as recreation, but it does have an impact in many different areas.
It does. So so on the back over here, I have this painting and it's called consistency. That's my word this year. I've never been a person of habit. My background is actually a stained glass studio artist, and I did that for years and years and years. And traditionally, artists aren't necessarily known for their business mind or their, attention to detail in the business world and that sort of thing. I feel like I did a little bit better job than the average, but anyway, that's just my background. So to do this trip, I had to totally plan. Like seriously, I have a spreadsheet that it'd be hilarious if you saw it, had every single day and who I was walking with and how many miles I thought I was going to walk and, how many bars I was going to have and how many calories and how many carbs and all that kind of stuff. And by the time I was done, I had a headache just planning that whole thing out. But the interesting thing is I did a really good job of planning because between that first 6 weeks and my last 2 weeks that I went, I had hardly any food left. I pretty much used what I needed, food wise. So that was a really good plan. The logistics of planning for people to meet me on the trail. That was not easy because there's parts of the Appalachian Trail that are close to roads. It's easy to get on and it's easy to get off. And there's parts that are not, So that whole planning, like how many miles I'm going to walk. And because I didn't go through from one place to the next, I had to figure out where we're going to park the car, how we're going to get from the car to where we're going to start our hike. And if we don't get all the way through, like happened on more than one occasion, how are we going to get back to our car? You know what I mean? A whole lot of planning that wasn't traditionally what I would do. And that sort of thing I've really put into my business today. So this year I've done time blocking. I've never done time blocking. I've never wanted to box myself into that. Well, what if something else comes up that I want to do that's more important? Well, that time blocking has really helped my business and helped me keep on track on a regular basis. And I still do those things that I want to do.
Absolutely.
But I put it in my calendar and I know that I have to work around it.
Yes. I think the time blocking actually frees you up. It doesn't hem you in. It frees you up. What I tell people is absolutely you can juggle pieces around. You just can't take anything off of the calendar, get rid of it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I won't do my writing today because I have something else. No, I have to relocate it to make sure that, it's still going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of notes. I did a lot of journaling. That was a really important part for me. In fact, you and I have talked about me possibly taking your writing workshop, which I really look forward to because it had such an impact on my life. I want to get those things down, not necessarily for the world to read, but for me and for myself. And as I write it, I remember some of the things that I went through and some of the feelings that I had along the way and some of the learning experiences, like what did you learn? It reminds me of these are things that really made a difference to me.
Yes. And then can kind of reorient you into that framework again. I would also encourage you to do it as a book if possible, because I know we've talked about this also, how much we love reading those kinds of books, A Year by the Sea, or any of those books that it's someone doing those vision quests for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad you asked me to speak on this because that's something that I want to be able to do more of. One of the things that, as a result of talking to you, and that was actually one of my goals. So I time block into my day when I'm going to type up those notes. That's something that I had planned since last year. And until I put it on that time blocking, it wasn't happening.
Yay, good.
I know, absolutely. And so I was through that. I'm looking through my pictures and through some of my videos and the videos of the trees. I took videos of the trees and the wind, and it absolutely takes me right back to where I was and those feelings and why I did what I did,
How awesome. Yeah. That is cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Yep. Well, I really appreciate you doing this interview. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the people who are watching to give them something to leave the interview with?
Don't, follow your promptings. That's something we say in my business all the time, follow your promptings. And that's another thing that I think this hike has helped me with a lot is if there's something that I feel, don't ignore that prompting, act on it and do something about it. Even if it's just writing it down, if it's not something that you're going to do right away, write it down and go back to it. And to me, I've always followed my gut, I call it, and I literally follow my gut. I get these feelings in my stomach, and I can tell if it's a good decision or a bad decision, and it doesn't mean that if I feel fear that keeps me from doing something, it's a different kind of gut feeling, if that makes any sense.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things I would say about those promptings is oftentimes they're kind of a whisper. They're fervent, but they're not necessarily loud. And so I think too many people do blow them off.
Yeah.
And for you to be in a place where you are far more likely to follow them, I imagine even that has greatly opened up your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say definitely follow your promptings.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So thank you so much for the interview. And Marlo is going to take the interview and then we'll post it on my YouTube channel. And then from there, we'll probably bump it to Facebook and we'll tag you so that you can forward it to the people that you would like to have see it. But I really
Perfect.
appreciate you doing this. And I'm sure we're going to have many more contacts because I
I
love
agree.
I love hearing your stories. So
That sounds great. Thank you, Bonnie.
thanks so much, Pat. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.